will be presenting on ESG and sustainability in transaction banking. And let's see how it's, no. Oh. So that's our team and our sponsor and mentor. So sustainability in transaction banking is a broad topic. What we will analyze today is how to approach a strategic, how to have a strategic approach to sustainability. That's why we'll be looking on the different products and solutions in this area and address whether they are succeeding or not. Our organization for the presentation will be, first I'll touch on the intentions and goals of key players in the field and greenwashing. Then Eugen will speak on the product landscape, also success factors and challenges. And then Max will end with our recommendations. So we think that banks' role is at the core of ESG transformation because as financial intermediaries, we are the one who needs to drive sustainable solutions and to channel the needed capital. Because of that, we are focusing on the GTB side, short-term products, trade finance and cash, environment and social aspects of ESG. We've been conducting interviews and researches. We've been using publicly available sources. And also, we found, during the process, we found that it's actually difficult to determine best practices because there is a lack of sufficient research on that matter. Another issue was with confidentiality because banks still consider ESG as their competitive advantage. So they were hesitant to share details about their definitions and structures. So about goals and intentions of the key players, we can speak about the banks. They are at the core of the transformation, but this is also a way to attract new clients and investors who are concerned with sustainability. Then there's the matter of pricing. Studies show that retail clients are actually willing to pay more for sustainable products, but then on the corporate side, banks are actually giving a lower pricing for ESG transactions. That's a way to incentivize their participation. Also about the IT development, we can say that obviously there's a need to develop a lot of tools in order to gather the data, monitor, report it, and that's expensive. So these investments are hampered because of the additional costs and because of the efforts competing with other initiatives banks may have at the time being. An interesting topic is the client's exclusion. So banks nowadays become more committed to being to having a good reputation and what is their contribution to society. So we are noticing how some of them are excluding or exiting from some certain activities, are stopping to fund them. And that's an issue because even if they do that, we think that these brown companies, just so to call them, will still find other investors. So these activities won't necessarily disappear. And then again, it could happen that if we are not there to fund their transition, at the end they won't transition at all. So that's not necessarily the desirable effect. The corporates are at the forefront of ESG. They've been pressured by consumers, by investors. Also, we think that that pressure goes not only about their business strategy, but also for their suppliers and products. Again, they have a problem with the ESG rating agencies because there are various agencies in the market, and that makes it difficult to navigate. And again, the same issue with banks, with the IT tools needed for that. Governments, on the other hand, they are they're the one that can drive the change. They can do that through regulations, obviously, but also public investments. We think that they're pressured by green parties, NGOs, citizens, which probably will make them regulate more on ESG, specifically ESG taxonomies, also greenwashing, also reporting standards. Greenwashing, there's a lack of consensus how to define it. It's a difficult topic. Nowadays, we are widely using or referring to all components of ESG when we refer to greenwashing. Here we can say that some of the definitions we can find related to this concept are more about disclosing only positive information. It could be also about misleading with third parties' qualifications. You can include many things within. But at the end, it can be caused by different taxonomies. That's one of the problems we have in our market because there's a disagreement how to measure a sustainable product. So at the end, because of that, it's difficult to prove how actually a product, how sustainable actually a product is. Also, you can say that labels are quite subjective nowadays, and with the time being, they can lose their credibility or relevance. They can vary by country, which makes it really complicated to navigate. Another risk of greenwashing arises with net zero commitments. They are rapidly becoming mainstream, but still they are all about positive claims and very ambitious goals. But we think that in order to avoid being accused of greenwashing, banks should really have a concrete plan with milestones. Also, regulators are expected to become tougher on greenwashing matters, but actually that's a problem because, or we can say that's a double-edged sword, because from one side, okay, they will create some reporting standards which will solve part of the problem. But on the other side, if these standards are not enough comprehensive, if they are not well implemented, that will be actually an issue for banks. About combating greenwashing, we can say that it's important to have this included within the risk management processes. Also, the ECB suggested that this consideration should be included within the product framework. Also, an interesting point is that compliance should be actually fallen into this and reviewing this. It's also important, of course, to train staff, to understand regulations, also to have a third-party agent, independent agent, that will be verifying and comparing data. And with that, I'll leave the floor to Ochin, who will present the next part.
Thanks, Paulina. So we looked at which sustainable GTP products 10 large banks are offering, and we found that there is more focus on trade finance products rather than cash management products. And the products linked to green and social objectives, they are most prominently offered to non-financial corporations, different from SMEs. And the green and sustainability-linked loans are the products that are mostly commonly offered by banks. And the market for social products remains smaller. And we found out that there is across the banking segments, the sustainable advisory or certification services are non-existent or limited. Demand for the GTP products, sustainable GTP products, far exceeds supply, and with that, in the coming years, sustainability is expected to become a vital element of a competitive GTP offering. And in terms of the projected increase in GTP revenue by 2025, the largest portion is expected to come from the documented trade finance, followed by buyer-led and supplier-side trade finance, and then commercial cards and green deposits, and we expect the payments to be the smallest portion. And with that, I would like to talk about the key success factors that we identified in GTP product offering. As you can see, there should be a strong leadership commitment and also a clear sustainable strategy and collaboration with the clients, regulators, sustainability experts, and other stakeholders. And a robust risk management practice is important, and also development of innovative products and solutions, and finally, transparent reporting in terms of showing the dedication to sustainability and also stay ahead of the competition. And we identified several challenges in GTP product offering, but in the benefit of this audience here, we would like to focus on only 4 critical most items. The first one would be there are many different standards and frameworks which can create inconsistency in terms of sustainability reporting and assessment. And also the transaction banking community lacks the common definitions of sustainability products. And there is no standard common agreement which is used by banks for ESG. And the second, there is limited focus on the various different nuances in the markets, such as the different markets, different industries, different companies. The existing frameworks, many of them, they focus mostly on the developed markets, and however, sustainable GTB product offering can differ in emerging markets due to the regulatory environment, economic conditions, and also technological capabilities. And the third one would be the lack of data and the challenge in terms of the transaction level information identification. And this is linked to the lack of investment for digital transformation, which is mainly due to the high cost of investment and also the concerns about data security and privacy, and also it's related to the limited understanding of the benefits of digital transformation. And finally, the last one would be the limited guidance from regulators and the existing frameworks on how to measure and report the sustainability. And this is creating a risk of substantial increases in compliance costs, which might not produce meaningful data, and also a risk of greenwashing because there is much more reliance on self-reporting. And with that, I would like to hand over to my colleague Max on the key recommendations.
Thank you, Elchin and Paulina. The final component of our research was to develop a set of recommendations and next steps for banks, rating agencies, regulators, and the BAFT community to encourage greater uptake, usage, and accessibility of ESG products. Today, we wanted to focus on one short-term and one long-term solution or recommendation. From a short-term perspective, I think we view the most important thing as pricing. Through our research, we found that there's been greater uptake in products that have favorable pricing component for clients. Through our research, we found that the most heavily used products were on the trade side, where there is that pricing component embedded, versus other ESG TV products, such as a green deposit, that have a less meaningful or potentially negative pricing impact on the client. In our view, we as banks and industry players need to focus on incorporating a pricing component to incentivize clients to better uptake and use ESG products. In the longer term, we need to create greater incorporation of ESG activities into clients' long-term overall strategies. As Elchin highlighted, the greatest challenge to achieving this is a lack of consistency in the ESG space in general. This comes in the form of varying product offerings from bank to bank, lack of standards applicable globally, inconsistent regulatory frameworks. In our view, over the coming years, BAFT should partner closely with banks, regulatory bodies, and rating agencies to develop a set of globally applicable standards that simultaneously can accommodate different bespoke regional and sector-based needs. So in conclusion, briefly, we view ESG as still a relatively immature and new focus within the GTB business. In our view, as product offerings continue to develop and mature, they will continue to create a more tangible impact in the ESG space in general, so long as the industry remains focused on developing product offerings and approaches that help clients affect meaningful change. So I think we can move briefly to Q&A quick.
Thanks, Max. So I'll start with question 1. To what extent can banks incentivize ESG successfully by using price? Well, clearly, when you look at price and its impact, it essentially comes down to what are consumers' purchase intentions. And that differs wildly from different regions. So if we look at the Western, often more economically developed nations, there are multiple studies which show that ESG is much more likely to be embedded in economic and social policy than some of the more developing nations that might rely on fossil fuel income for their social development. So clearly, in these scenarios, the Western, more economically developed nations will be more likely to be impacted by price. And we looked at a number of studies on this that attest to this, this hypothesis. Principally, the management consultant Carney highlighted that 66% of global consumers would be willing to pay a higher premium for a green product than a conventional equivalent. But if you look beyond that data and you look at the actual regional differences between them, it attests to this hypothesis. But the secondary aspect to consider on this is when you are using price to incentivize an ESG-orientated policy, one of the key, I suppose, emerging concepts at the moment is clearly greenwashing. And so our view is essentially that in the short term, price can be used to incentivize ESG behaviors, but if you are to mitigate the risk of greenwashing that might come with essentially behavioral motivations based on financial growth, then we, building on what Max said, our belief is that you need standardization in data disclosures, in regulatory frameworks, and by doing that, you will be able to embed sustainability practices successfully.
I can take the second question. What are the challenges in the ECG sustainability environment in transaction banking industry? So the main challenges are basically that there is a lack of the principles. For example, for the bonds and the green loans, like revolving credit facilities, you have in place like green loan and bond principles. However, for the transaction services products, you don't have those. So it's very important to get additional principles in place or to adapt the green bond and the loan principles into the transaction banking side. And also the big issue is on the standardization and the lack of the minimum standards, also not just within the banks when they are working on their frameworks, but also within the rating agencies.
Thank you. So I'll try to take this third question. How can GTB treat brown companies from a sustainability perspective? There's always the debate whether the bank should continue funding the non-sustainable companies. And I guess the question is more on whether unsustainable activities have to be banned immediately and completely, or rather should the banks be helping or leading these brown companies to transition to net zero, which we think should be the right way. And one of the initiatives for the banks to support the steel industry, for example, is the creation of the Sustainable Steel Principles Framework, which is a voluntary framework helping the banks and also their steel clients, providing them the common tools and methodologies to measure the progress along the net zero pathway.
Perhaps we can answer one more question very quickly. Will the rating agencies for sustainability survive in the future? We strongly believe that they will survive if there is a need for the third parties to be involved in the ECG space. Thank you, everybody.